you join today with the Fundraising School with Bill Stanczykiewicz. And I think I just killed that, and I'm really sorry, Bill. I had practiced it a little bit, but that's okay. You can go ahead and correct me. I had seen Bill's presentation on trends in fundraising a couple months ago, and I was just really blown away on how applicable and important the work that he's doing is in today's world. We all know things are fast changing, and we need to be able to know exactly how we should be responding now, as well. What are things going to be like 6-12 months from now? So I reached out to Bill minutes after the presentation was done, and I said, hey, this was incredible. Can you come to Apra Maryland and share some of this insight that you have? And he agreed and was kind enough to be able to come to us and share. And I know he's going to be talking a little bit about the Fundraising School as well. So I think today is just going to be an amazing experience. So Bill, Liz and I had talked. Liz helped with the coordination, and we're going to let you kind of do some of your introduction as well as talk about the Fundraising School and then take it away from there. So welcome, Bill.
Well, Joanna, thanks for hosting us today. It's an absolute delight to be with our friends from Apra Maryland. The Fundraising School has been around since 1974, providing research and evidence-based content on techniques that work in fundraising. And we are embedded within the Indiana University Lilly Family School Philanthropy. We have about 24 academic faculty doing research all the time. And in addition, about 8 folks on a research team that are also providing primary research. And we're able to bring that research directly to you, translated for practical activity. And of course, now more than ever, is like people want to know what's been happening during the pandemic. How can I be planning for today? What will the future look like? And based on the research that we've been able to gather through our school. As we get started, though, I just have to share some really fond Maryland memories with you. Aunt Kay's Toll House. Anybody been to Aunt Kay's Toll House for a meal there in Silver Spring? I know that's more kind of maybe Washington, D.C., part of Maryland, for some of you who live out across the state, which, by the way, is there a more uniquely shaped state than Maryland, right? I mean, you go all the way to the west by West Virginia, and then all the way to the south, almost down by North Carolina. Just really unique. Carmen and I, my wife, we celebrated one of our wedding anniversaries on a bed and breakfast on Chesapeake Bay. That was fantastic. And then the year that we took our 4 kids to Washington, D.C. for spring break to do all the good touristy and civic type things, it was obviously spring break is right around what? Final Four of the men's basketball tournament. And we were heading back to Indiana on a Saturday and wanted to watch the Final Four games. And this was even, smartphones weren't so much in vogue. We saw the old Atlas, going old school now with the Atlas. And we were able to determine that we could make it to Cumberland, Maryland in time for the first game. I don't know, is anybody from Cumberland, Joanna, in your group here today? So Cumberland, beautiful town in the hills and the hollers section of Maryland. And there was just one spot open to watch the ball game. And it was kind of a shot and a beer, kind of a bar place. So here we come with our 4 little kids into the shot and a beer bar place. Unfortunately, they were glad to have us. And we watched the 2 Final Four games before getting back in the car and driving along. So lots of fun Maryland memories for my family. Wish you the very best, as you do truly live in a very diverse state with hills and a certain type of economy to the west and the ocean to the east, urban areas, Baltimore, the Washington, D.C. metro area. Boy, Maryland just really has it all in so many different ways. And I'm glad to bring you this information here today. So as we do so, the first thing I want to do is, being a university, we like to have definitions to be clear about exactly what it is we're talking about. And this is our definition of philanthropy: voluntary action for the public good. And one thing we need to remember is that we are good folks doing very important work, and we are entitled to nothing. We are always asking people to volunteer, right? So what is it that we volunteer? What are those actions? Well, as fundraisers, we often think of that action being charitable giving of money and other financial resources. But there are other actions associated with philanthropy. When somebody volunteers their time, that's philanthropic behavior. And as we've seen with the important reemergence of issues associated with racial justice and reconciliation, advocacy is a form of philanthropy. Now, as fundraisers, we want to emphasize that if somebody is volunteering their time or volunteering their voice, that is still a form of engagement with our nonprofit organization, which can lead to volunteering of charitable giving later on. So as fundraisers, we need to be thinking about that. In fact, according to the National Corporation of the Corporation for National Service within our federal government, that if we treat our volunteers well, 80% of them will become donors. And so think about those folks who are volunteering for you. Think about those folks who are advocating for you, whether it's formal demonstrations, petitions, preparing information for legislatures to take a look at. All of those are forms of engagement, and those could be potential donors for you down the line. So voluntary action for what? For the public good. What does that mean? Maybe that one's a little less clear than those other two words. Well, this helps us distinguish between the business and government and nonprofit sectors. And so, first of all, business sector, that one's easy. Those are private goods, private wealth for private goods. So that's easy. What about government? Isn't government a public good? Well, a couple distinctions. Government on its best days allows everybody who's eligible into the program. So everybody can attend the public school. Everybody can use the public park. All veterans can use the Veterans Administration. Everybody of a certain age can use Medicare, right? And I know for many, maybe all of you, it's an all come, all serve, right? That you have the whole public come. But in the philanthropic sector, we can really be narrow if we want to be. So if I want to start a youth little league in my community so the girls can play softball and the boys can play baseball, but your thing is basketball, or your thing is volleyball, or East Coast, your thing is lacrosse, right? Field hockey, those sports, which are big in your region of our country. Or maybe you say, like, sports isn't even my thing. I want the youth to be doing arts. Or you're saying, I'm not even about the youth. I'm about the senior citizens, or about animal welfare, about the environment. We can be very much more narrowly tailored. Another important distinction is, remember, we are voluntary action. Government is not voluntary. Government is coercive. Government is required. We have to pay our taxes. We're required to follow the law and the regulations. So there's really not much choice to it unless you choose to go to jail or choose to pay the fine by not paying your taxes or following the law. The other important aspect here, and this goes back to our nation's founding, some of the writings in the Federalist Papers, some of the writings of de Tocqueville, early in our nation's history, that the philanthropic sector protects the voice of the minority. So in government, we just went through an election season. One side wins and another side loses, and at some levels they win and at other levels they lose, and vice versa, and all over the place. What happens to the side that loses, right? So certainly in the legislature, the minority side can still have their voice, but also in our sector, everybody can have their voice. And you cannot name one major social movement in US history that didn't start in what we understand today as the philanthropic sector. So that we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, finally recognizing women's right to vote. That movement started in the 1850s in what today would be known as the philanthropic sector. Think about the abolitionist movement, right? Following the Civil War, the workers' rights movements. You think about the civil rights movement. Anything that you can name had its roots in the philanthropic sector. So keep that in mind as you're doing your important work, meeting your fundraising metrics, meeting your fundraising goals, fulfilling the mission of your nonprofit organization. All of us together are in this big, wonderful, complicated, beautiful sector that can really touch lives in different, more powerful, profound ways than the business and the government sectors, which are both important, but we have some unique aspects to our work as well. And we fund that through fundraising, the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. And I think everybody in this meeting today, you're veteran experienced fundraisers, you have this. Hopefully this definition can give you some handles in case there are colleagues or board members who are a little hesitant to fundraise. First of all, this is gentle. We're not twisting arms. We're not putting pressure on anybody. This is a gentle conversation, and this is an art. And so we keep in mind, you could have 10 people who are all donors to your organization, and they could have some similar views, but they could actually have 10 very distinct, different reasons why they want to donate to your nonprofit organization. And that's where the art comes in. As we like to say, those of us who are fully able to have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth, we should be observing and listening to our donors 80% of the time when we're in communication, and only talking 20% of the time, because we're really trying to pick up why precisely do they want to give to our nonprofit organization. So gentle art, helping contextualize our fundraising requests to each individual donor's motivations, the gentle art of teaching about the problem or opportunity that we're trying to solve, teaching them about our solution through our programs and services, teaching them about our results or our intended results, and then teaching them about how their gift can make a difference. The gentle art of teaching, and here's the best part. What are we teaching? The joy of giving. This is scientifically proven. You know how you feel when you do somebody a favor, when you do, thank you, Connor, for that. I appreciate that. When you help somebody out, when you make a charitable gift, when you volunteer, you know how you feel. That's been scientifically documented that, the way our synapses connect, the way our body chemistry changes is the same as the feelings we have for euphoria when we're involved philanthropically. In fact, perhaps you're aware that there are psychiatrists, psychologists who will prescribe, say, 1 hour of volunteering as part of an overall mental health prescription. There still might be meds, still might be counseling, but they'll say, go volunteer for an hour. And that's because, people know they're not alone in challenges in life. They're not ruminating just in their own homes. They're getting out, they're interacting with other people. They're seeing that there are other people who have challenges and that they themselves can be part of the solution. So because of what happens with the joy that we experience through philanthropic behavior. So now more than ever before in this pandemic, the delivery businesses are doing better than ever before. Grubhub and DoorDash and UPS and FedEx and all Amazon delivery and all the rest of them are more busy than ever before. You and I, as fundraisers, are in the joy delivery business. Think about that package. That package contains joy, and you get to knock on the door and leave it on the step and walk away for social distancing. That's what you're doing when you fundraise. And people say they're hesitant to fundraise. I feel sorry for people who don't fundraise. Like, who doesn't want to be in the joy delivery business, right? That's what we get to do as we follow our metrics, hit our goals, fulfill our mission. We have this broader purpose and this broader opportunity of bringing joy to other people. All right, so then as we lead as fundraisers, we want to just keep this in mind and be sure of our opportunities, that we're always looking outside the organization. And then there's inside the organization, kind of a dual role there. We're looking into the future and also at the present. And our first job as fundraisers is always to be thinking about vision, thinking about strategy. What's next for our organization, that our organization can have an impact and that donors are going to have an interest. Then as we look into the future, we come back into the organization, we make sure everybody is on board. This is our role of change agent leadership. And then now programs are being implemented, right? We're inside the organization in the present, and the programs are being implemented. Program staff are carrying those out. And then here's the best part. In the present, we go back outside the organization, which has a compelling vision. Everybody's on board. The programs are being implemented and producing results, and we get to fundraise. So again, that's how fundraising fits into the overall work of the nonprofit, not just a table with numbers and checking off and making sure we're hitting our goals, but helping the organization accomplish this vision in a very unique way. And that is what we are inviting donors to become a part of. All right, so that's kind of a contextual beginning. Let's take a look at some data. And yes, these are the data from 2019. And you're thinking, why in the world did Joanna bring us a guy with data from before the pandemic? All I'm going to say is trust Joanna, all right? Because she's seen this before and she knows where this is going. And I promise I'm going to tie this together before we're over. So hang with me. All right. So first of all, 2019, nearly $450 billion were donated in the United States. That's impressive in and of itself, especially when we consider that was the second highest total after adjusting for inflation ever. So one of the best fundraising years ever until the pandemic hit and we went to sheltering in place. Breakdowns, you veteran fundraisers, these are familiar to you, 69% from individuals, except it's more than that because about half the foundation dollars are money being donated into donor advised funds and family foundations. And of course, bequests are individuals as well. So 69 plus 8, 77, another 10%, 87, 80% of charitable giving from individuals, and then we supplement our fundraising from foundations and corporations. So keep that number in mind, second best year ever, nearly 450 billion before the pandemic started. The breakdowns in the pie, the subsectors, again, the order is about the same. The percentages maybe vary from one year to the next, but religion's still leading the way. And again, if you're with a faith-based nonprofit, just always remember religion, the way this is defined, is the place of worship or the denomination, not the faith-based homeless shelter, the faith-based school. All that's important. Those are located in education, human services, and elsewhere around the pie. So you can see yourself here in the different subsectors. And again, the order is about the same from one year to the next. What's important is in 2019, all of these subsectors went up after adjusting for inflation, except international affairs. So again, that was a lot of strength. And usually international affairs giving from the United States is driven, sadly, by natural disasters. So the good news is we didn't have as many natural disasters around the world in 2019. But what that meant was international affairs did not gain faster than inflation like the other 8 categories did. So another example of a lot of momentum coming into 2020. All right. So then COVID hits, and how does the nonprofit sector respond? And these findings are actually, there's quite a bit of academic research already that's been conducted on our sector into what's been happening during COVID. And let me say, though, too, also kind of a ground rule for today. If you have a question or an observation, just interject. And so, Joanna, are you watching the chat? Yeah. So Joanna's going to watch the chat. And so just type in a question, and Joanna will interrupt me. And Joanna, that's okay. Don't worry about interrupting. I'm very accustomed to that. And we'll just deal with the question or the observation or the disagreement while the slide is up. And then we'll also have some time at the end of our 90-minute session for questions and answers. So Joanna, do we have any just yet?
No big questions yet. Early on, there was a comment that Cumberland, Maryland is great for snow skiing. And then Connor mentioned that volunteering actually helps you live longer. So that's another good selling point. And Elise was talking about the effects of COVID on volunteering and how it's been difficult to really be as active in that field.
Yeah, so COVID doesn't help you live longer, and not volunteering just compounds that, right? No, Connor's absolutely right. In fact, one of the researchers who found that discovery is on our faculty, Dr. Sarah Conrad. That one blows me away. But that has like sort of existential, philosophical, like how can I extend my life, right? Don't we all have a birth date and a death date? We can extend our lives, research shows, by being active philanthropically, including by volunteering. So yeah, please continue to put that in the chat. And Joanna, if you see a specific question, just please go right ahead and interrupt. All right, so we looked at the kind of just a good landscape overview of philanthropy and fundraising, kind of looked at where we were with fundraising before the pandemic hits. And now at about this time a year ago, we start hearing the rumblings about endemic, pandemic, sheltering in place. Is this coming to the United States? All these types of things. And sure enough, by March, we were quarantining. So what's been happening in the sector, and probably everybody in this meeting is going to see themselves in this bullet point list somehow. Cutting spending, a hiring freeze. We certainly have that right now where I work. Same thing with a salary freeze. You look at expanding programs. This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but the research actually shows when we're in an economic downturn, one way to generate revenue is by expanding your programs, and even creating new programs as a way to get new donors and new earned income in the door. And fully 80% of nonprofits said that they were doing just that. Canceling fundraising events flat out. And then there was a concern, would online fundraising events work? I can tell you, I don't have empirical data on this. This is purely anecdotals. I've been teaching for the fundraising school in these first 6 weeks of the new year. Just how many fundraisers have said our online fundraiser had more participation and more money raised than ever before. I'm wondering if you want to do a Zoom thumbs up or something, if that was you, or a hand or something, but we're just hearing that quite a bit. And it's not to minimize people who are struggling and are having some challenges. Thank you, Elise, for that. No doubt, but also that the online fundraisers, people are responding to those. And, again, when you think about what we talked about, the benefits of philanthropy and philanthropic behavior. So here we have COVID, we have a pandemic, people are getting sick, we're hearing mortality numbers, we had the stress of the election season, We have the very important stress, again, related to these issues around racial justice and racial reconciliation. And people are wondering about their jobs and being able to pay their mortgage and their rent, all these kinds of things. And here you come as the fundraiser. And remember, philanthropy at the end of the day is a message of hope, that we have the audacity to believe that we can make the world a better place. So in the midst of all this stress, all this complexity, all these challenges, you're coming with your online special event, and it seems donors have been responding in a very favorable way. And then obviously this is kind of intuitive that nonprofits with an endowment, with an operational reserve are doing the best right now. And we get this question all the time. What do I do to survive a recession? What do I do to build an operating reserve? The bad news is we always get that question during the recession, because the answer is when there's not a recession, right? Is to structure your budget in such a way that ending with that surplus every year to be able to put money away for a rainy day. And in one of our courses, the Principles and Techniques course, we actually teach a budgeting technique that is aimed towards helping you finish with a surplus every year. I led a nonprofit for 17 years. It included a couple of recessions, included the Great Recession. We finished with a surplus all 17 years. And we went from zero reserve in 1998 to about 3 million in reserves by 2015, by just continually to put money away during the stronger years. So there are ways to do it. Right now is not the time, unfortunately, when the economy is down. So again, you see yourself in that slide. Many of us have been through some or all of these different types of situations due to COVID. All right, what about donor behavior? What's been happening there? So within the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, we have the Women's Philanthropy Institute, and they decided to do a survey of donors and say, so what's going on now that we have COVID? So first of all, some positive news, 79% of households said, we are going to continue donating regardless of the pandemic. In fact, 25 percentage points within that, so about a third of the people still donating, a fourth of the overall respondents said, we're even going to donate more. And that makes sense from the folks who are still working full-time, still receiving their full-time income, maybe even eligible for the federal stimulus checks, and aren't buying as many clothes and shoes as they used to buy, not going out to eat as much, not buying as much gasoline for the car that they're no longer using, maybe even got a rate reduction on their car insurance, certainly not going to Disney World or flying to Europe anytime soon. And we're seeing things like people adding onto their homes and doing other home repair, and certainly some industries are thriving. But we're seeing a not insignificant share of people saying, I'm also going to be donating more to charity right now. So again, one of the takeaways for you from these data before we go on through the rest of the findings is think about your consistent annual fund donors, and don't hesitate to ask them for a second gift or a special gift, even if you wouldn't have done so in other years. And the key isn't that you are making that second ask, it's how you make that second ask, by acknowledging the first gift. Say, thanks, you've been with us as an annual fund donor. You're so key to our thriving over these last several years. Thank you for the gift you've made already this fiscal year. I need to call that out because people are going to say, didn't they get my last gift? Thank you for that gift you've made. As you might understand, like everybody, we're facing some challenges right now. Would you please consider a second gift this year? Just phrasing it in that tone, in that approach. You might not hear yes, but you might be surprised on how many times you do hear yes, because people really get it. And these data show the persistence of individual donors during this time. Charitable giving staying the same for the vast majority of U.S. households when it hasn't. Very intuitive reasons, health and economic reasons. Either I've lost my job, I'm worried about losing my job. We have COVID in the house, I'm worried I might get the COVID. All these types of things makes total sense. But here is one of the key findings of this study. The donor most likely to stop donating right now is the single woman household. And let's think about that for a moment, okay? So for decades, the household that is most charitably active is the married couple household, followed close second by the single female household, the single male household distant third, okay? So you have a really significant share by demographic of a donor group here that is most likely to stop donating. Now, the research didn't indicate why, but there was a fascinating story in the New York Times, and I put this on my Twitter feed. In fact, my Twitter account is all fundraising, all leadership. If you follow me, I'll follow you back. It's @_Bill Stan. and we'll just learn from each other, sharing fundraising and leadership information. I put this New York Times story up there because what it talked about was usually during an economic recession, it's the men who suffer most of the job loss. It's in construction, manufacturing, male-dominated fields, right? Not this time. Home construction right now, they can't build the houses fast enough. People putting rooms on the back of their houses, digging swimming pools. All these, again, male-dominated professions are doing really well. Here in Indiana, we make most of the RVs, recreational vehicles, for the rest of the country. The unemployment rate in that county is below 4%. They can't find enough workers to make these RVs because people are saying, I don't want to stay at home. I'm not staying in a motel. I'm buying me an RV and seeing some state parks and national parks, right? So, and again, predominantly male-dominated fields. The sectors that are suffering most right now, right? When you talk about hospitality and tourism, when you talk about the airline industry, when you talk about some of our service industries, tend to be more female predominant. And so it's more women losing their jobs right now than men. When you look at the 10 million Americans who are still unemployed compared to a year ago, the majority of those are women for the reasons that we're articulating here. So women are more likely to suffer job loss. Women still, with whatever social cultural advances we made, with many, many more still to go, still have the responsibility of home care duties. So if the children aren't in school, they're running the Schofield, is that how you say your name, Joanna? If this were you, the Schofield Institute of Learning, online learning at the dining room table, right? And the female running the household is also still taking care of parents or parents living by themselves, right? So they more likely have job loss, still have all those family responsibilities, even more so now. Very intuitive reasons why a single female donor right now, especially who's a mom, is saying, going to have to hit pause on the charitable giving. So what does that mean for us as fundraisers? We're going to have to look at our donor databases differently moving forward. Again, in annual fund, we're continually collecting new donors, direct mail to strangers, social media, special events, relationships through our board and our staff and our volunteers and our donors, right? Continually getting new donors in the door. And then we're watching who donates one year to the next. And when somebody donates 3 or 4 years in a row, we know they've invited us to invite them to make a higher dollar amount gift, right? And I think in my fundraising career, I've always heard yes. I don't know if I've ever heard no. Didn't always get the higher number I requested, but still a higher number from what they were donating before, right? Well, now we've got this pause, right? Single mom, single female, even if she's not a mom, has hit pause on her charitable giving. There's going to be a gap in the donor database. We're going to have to remember that. We're going to have to adjust the way we analyze our donor database based on this reality of COVID. And that could be true for a single male donor, a married household donor, two people who are significant others with each other, partners with each other. They've hit the pause on donating at this particular time. So we need to find opportunities to keep them engaged. Look for opportunities. Can they volunteer in some way? Can they do some things for us online? Can we at least keep them informed? Because it's not that they're not interested in our nonprofit. We're just blaming COVID, right? And until that ends, hopefully they can come back as donors. Let's find ways to keep them engaged and analyze our donor database accordingly. Some similar research was gathered by our good friends at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. The reporter's name is Thies. And this research, again, very similar to the WPI research. So we're seeing some saturation now, some good consistency in the research findings, that about 70% of folks were saying, yes, I still believe in those nonprofit organizations. And they are responding with that size of an average gift. Check this out, though. People who say they're not confident in nonprofits are still donating. Like, that's a wonderful surprise. Now, when you look at that dollar amount, I almost kind of wonder, like, were they trying to take advantage of that $300 universal charitable deduction for non-itemizers? I don't know, because no confidence, you'd think that might be a zero, but it's still $285. What were nonprofits saying 220 was looking at compared to 2019? Take a look at that. 77% reporting that their donors were staying the same or even increasing their gift. Very similar percentages to what we saw in the WPI findings, okay? And by income, no different there than what we saw before the pandemic. Obviously, the higher the household income and wealth, the higher the giving has been. So again, not everybody's still donating, but somewhere between 75 and 80% of people in households saying we're still donating. And about 25 percentage points within those groups, about a third of donors saying they're increasing their giving because of the pandemic. And the photo you see here is a gentleman by the name of Rick Dunham. Rick runs his own national fundraising consulting firm out of Dallas, Texas. And when the Giving USA data came out in June of 2020, Rick didn't predict, he didn't guarantee, but he said, I will not be surprised if the end result for 2020 isn't all that different from 2019. Because I think donors who are still employed are going to stay with the nonprofits that they care about. And I can tell you anecdotally, so far, we've been hearing that from nonprofit organizations as we've taught for the fundraising school. Now, the next Giving USA data, unfortunately, don't come out until June. So all we have is speculation and anecdote right now. But I taught a course about this time a month ago, had 100 participants from around the country. And I said, what are you most excited about for fundraising this year? And what are you most concerned about? And the preponderance of what people were concerned about was, how can I match 2020? Because I beat my goals. We had record fundraising. The special event has never been better, and the board's going to want us to do that again. Again, just an anecdote for now, not to minimize the people who are suffering, but it's also not zero. It's also not gloom and doom. You see the possibility in these data if we maintain relationship with our current donors. All right. Donor advised funds. Very interesting overall. They're very interesting heading into the pandemic, even more interesting.
Bill is muted.
I accidentally hit my space bar. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, if you just do that one thing, you will triple your fundraising. Anything else that you missed while I was muted? Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for whoever called. I think that was Viola. Thanks for calling that out. And Joanna, do we have any questions that we need to share before I press on with donor advised funds?
Well, I think everyone's wondering how to triple your fundraising just like that now.
Yeah,
All
right,
the secrets were said, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot what I said. Yeah, just having some fun with you all. Okay,
yeah,
donor.
no, we're doing great. I'm definitely interested in hearing a little bit more at some point about what some nonprofits are doing to make sure that women are staying engaged and that we don't embed kind of a disadvantage to women in the modeling scores that we create.
Yeah, but we can pause there. Has anybody done that yet? Has anybody seen that show up in their fundraising? If you want to put that in the chat, or if you want to unmute, if they're able to unmute, maybe Joanna has you all muted.
Yeah, people can unmute, but yeah, Sarah said that we really need to guard against future bias that might happen from this time.
And that's why we want to call that data out. So Sarah, absolutely, thank you for that. Good warning, good constructive warning. That the data are going to be speaking to us in a different way because of the pandemic, especially as it relates to gender distinctions in giving. All right, donor advised funds. And again, if other people have comments, I know, or questions, Joanna will interject. So again, these donor advised funds have been around since 1931 in New York, in community foundations. But the big development happened probably about 20, 25 years ago when donor advised funds were now being created in private wealth management firms. So think about Schwab, Fidelity, Wells Fargo, all these different kind of firms, your regional bank, your local bank. And basically, people were coming to them for financial advice, investment advice, financial planning advice, and would also bring up, hey, we're charitably active. Do you have something for that as well? And, these private wealth management firms, in effect, were like, yes, we do. And what they did was they created a nonprofit organization within their for-profit, alongside their for-profit corporation, to be able to host these donor advised funds. And the moment that happened, giving into donor advised funds happened at a very significant level. In fact, you see the rankings here from 2017 that donor advised funds were 4 of the top 10 of the Philanthropy 400, outranking some of the big girls and boys in our sector like Harvard, the Y, and Goodwill. So a significant amount of money going into donor advised funds. So one of the questions is why? What is up with that? So our school's research and research that we've gleaned from other good, smart, reputable folks shows that, like anything with human behavior, there's never one simple solution. There are a myriad of reasons that we can take a look at. Number one was the 2017 federal tax policy. That change was made on December 22nd, literally 9 days before the year ended. And there were several donors who said, I don't know what 2018 is. I don't understand it yet. So I'm just going to put money into my donor advised fund now and get the tax advantages now. And I'll let 2018, I'll figure that out later. We've had folks come from Fidelity and Schwab and other places speak at our school. And they said those last 9 days, they were working 16 hours a day with people establishing and putting money into donor advised funds. We also know, though, even though that was a tyranny of the urgent, that by and large, most donor advised fund donors are our most strategic donors. They're actually putting the money away into a donor advised fund. They can never take it back. It's there forever. And it can only be used for charitable purposes, but they want to give it a think. They want to contemplate. They want to wait for the right opportunity. They're our most strategic donor. And doing so is much more easy than creating a private or a family foundation. If I wanted to create a family foundation, I'm creating a nonprofit organization. I need a board of at least 3 people who are at least 18 years old. I have to fill out all the forms and send them to my state government here in Indiana. Once I get that approval, now I have to fill out even more forms and send them to our federal government, IRS in Washington, D.C. And then I have to have my meetings, keep my records, do my 990s every year, have my registered agent document with state government, or I can just open a DAF today. Done, right? So a lot easier than creating a private foundation. Some people will bunch up their money in a donor advised fund to make a larger gift that they either want to make a larger gift or they maybe want to do that in a leadership, reputational sort of way to help the nonprofit attract gifts from others. They have the so-called liquidity moment where they sold a business, had a promotion, right? Inherited farmland. This is a story we heard from a nonprofit not too long ago, and it was $10 million worth of farmland inherited from mom and dad, and Junior didn't want to be a farmer, so he sold the farmland in Illinois and donated a significant share of that money into his donor advised fund and then to nonprofits. Donating from a DAF allows you to be anonymous, and that's always a concern with fundraisers, like who do I send the thank you note to? Our school's research, also confirmed by some other researchers, has shown fewer than 10% of DAF donors stay anonymous. So that's helpful there. And of course, you get the instant tax deduction. So people do it for that reason, which raises concerns about the donor advised fund, because once I donate into the DAF, it never has to leave. And yet I still receive the immediate tax consideration for that gift. So that's when you hear some good friends in our sector saying there should be a minimum payout from donor advised funds. It's to guard against the DAF only being used for these tax reasons. Okay. So in 2000,
Bill, I have a quick question.
Yes. Make it a slow question.
Regarding the anonymous nature of DAFs, and this can be to everyone who's here as well. Is there a way that you can find out which prospects are actually connected to a DAF?
So it's not like finding a foundation, right? Where you can Google search based on your nonprofit and your cause, or know about the foundations in your Maryland community or in your region, or maybe the North Atlantic states, Mid-Atlantic, and so forth, or go on Candid, in their database and enter some keywords. Really not. So basically, you start with forming relationships with individuals and then finding out that they have a donor advised fund. And that's actually going to be one of the takeaways here when we see some of the data. Or our community foundation people sometimes will let you know who the donor advised fund holder is. But yeah, you just can't say, oh, who has a DAF? I'm going to go find them. You're still looking at individual recruitment and cultivation.
That's great. And so probably also making sure you capture that information in your database and having a place to store that so you can go back to it. All right, great. Thank you.
Especially during times of economic downturn. And that's what the research is going to be showing here next. So first of all, again, what's happening in terms of dollars in, dollars out? So the most recent year available, we saw 2018, the number of accounts went up 60%. Oh my goodness, big, huge crush of new accounts. But you look at dollars in, we're about $29 billion, out, we're about 19 billion. So yes, that still leaves 10 billion sitting in those accounts. And from one year to the next, it's another 10 billion still sitting in those accounts. But about 2/3 of what's going in is coming out in any given year. So I will say to our friends who are advocates for a minimum payout rate. So foundations are 5%. If we put DAFs at 5%, let's not leave money on the table, because right now DAFs are at about 65% payout. Let's just make sure we capture and not, force people to artificially limit what's coming out. I will also tell you that the folks from, Schwab and Fidelity and others have been telling us that they've received the memo on this concern that the DAFs are parking lots, and many of them, at least the larger ones that have the capacity to do so, they're watching. And if Bill doesn't make a donation out of his DAF in 3 years, 3 consecutive years, they call Bill and they say, look, we notice there's no activity technically under the federal government. We own the money. We're just going to give it out unless you want to tell us who to give it to. So they're trying to be a little more proactive that way. Now, again, please don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to talk you out. If you feel we should have a minimum payout, you go to your town hall meeting with your congressperson, you work through your associations and you lobby for that. Just trying to give you the data, objective information that you can use accordingly. Now, here's why this is important during COVID. During times of economic downturn, okay, giving from donor advised funds goes up and goes up considerably. And we shouldn't be surprised by that, because remember, we know from our other research that the donor advised fund donor tends to be the most strategic donor, or among the more strategic of the donor class, right? And so then the Great Recession hits, donations went up, dollars went up, percentage of portfolio donated all went up significantly, okay? And now some new research that just came out last week from the National Philanthropic Trust, is reported by Candid. We now have DAF data from the first 6 months of 2020. Maybe you saw this because you read the same newspaper as I do. Look what happened. The number of gifts went up by 37% from donor advised funds. The dollars went up by 30% compared to 2019. And all of the subsectors went up except arts and culture, okay? So the two researchers from the previous slide, Dr. Danielle Vance McMullen, she teaches at DePaul University up in Chicago, and Dr. Dan Heist, who's now at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, both alums of our academic programs, by the way. I kind of felt like they were kind of like, told ya, because it happened. The data showed that it happened. The giving from donor advised funds went up significantly in the first 6 months of 2020. So this is why, and as Joanna said, we're going to keep track of this in our donor database. If you know somebody who holds a donor advised fund, now isn't a good time. Now is a great time to be talking to them like, hey, I understand, the data show people who have DAFs tend to give more during times of economic downturn. Do you find yourself doing that? Is that a time we can be talking with you in relation to our nonprofit? Joanna, I see you've unmuted there. Would you like to interject?
Yes. So Elise had a question regarding DAFs. Do you know what percentage have not been giving out and have a zero give out? Do you know that number?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
And
so
then
I will recommend, there is a woman, she's at one of the Boston schools, Boston College, Boston University, and Elise, if you follow this closely, I'm going to mention Dr. Ray Madoff, Madoff. She is a proponent of the policy that we should have that minimum distribution requirement. If anybody had those stats, I bet you Dr. Madoff would have them. I just don't have them myself.
Great. And Valerie just wanted to share that the 3-year information was really helpful on the DAFs, trying to make sure people are giving out. So that was helpful information.
Yeah, and we hope they're all doing that, right? We hope the banks and by the way, your nonprofit could host a DAF. Did you, like Indiana University, you could set up a DAF through Indiana University. Boy Scouts of America, they've set up DAFs, and it's a way of donor service. Now at IU, you have to give at least half of your DAF to IU, or we're not going to host it for you. So you can set up some rules like that. But basically anybody in the philanthropic sector can host a DAF, including our private sector friends, as we're now seeing. All right. Thank you for that good conversation, Elise. I appreciated the thumbs up there from you. All right, let's move ahead. Planned giving. And by the way, this is the topic of our podcast this week with the Fundraising School, is the data you're going to see next. Our podcast comes out every Monday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. You'll receive an email from us. And if you're not getting that email from us because you haven't been in one of our classes before, we still like you anyway. We want to send you that email so that you're aware of the podcast. Okay. And all the podcasts are free. Show them to your staff, your board. And they're also archived on our website, right? So this is a free resource, and they're only 10 to 15 minutes, not a half an hour, an hour. So right to the point. And even when we look at research, they're all translated into practical fundraising tips and advice, including this week, these data on planned giving. Check this out. So the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners partnered with our good friends at Marks and Lundy, and they surveyed nonprofits. And they said, hey, during COVID, what are you seeing with planned giving? There's this more talk of health issues and mortality. Maybe it's harder to talk about planned giving, right? Because death is even more in the news. Or is it a better time? What do the data say? Listen to the data. What are the data saying? The data are saying 2/3 of nonprofits are hearing more from people, more from donors about the possibility of making a planned gift. Okay. Designating the nonprofit in the retirement plan. More than half of nonprofits said, yep, we're hearing that. All right. What about that qualified charitable donation out of the required mandatory distribution from the retirement accounts? Right now, the age changed. Remember, it was 70 and a half. Now it's 72 and a half for the required minimum distribution. And we need to be thinking about those people in that mid-range age point there. But people can still make that qualified charitable donation, and nearly half of nonprofits are hearing about that from our seasoned citizens. Okay, so keep that in mind. What about the planned gift donor increasing the gift? Saying, look, I made a pledge in my will for $25,000, and I'm going to put that up to $50,000, let's say. Again, 2/3 of nonprofits, their planned gift donors are coming to them and increasing the dollar amount. What about just making the gift outright? 46%. I'm going to raise my hand on that one. We had a gentleman who made a planned gift in university world, a 7-figure gift to endow a chair. He's paying that off now. He wants to enjoy the joy of giving now and see the creation of that seat now. So he's been making pledge payments now on his planned gift. And we see here nearly half of nonprofits are experiencing exactly that people are saying, I want to experience that right now. What about people revoking their planned gift? Need to circle the wagons, pull the money back, not make that promise. Fortunately, only about 20% of nonprofits are reporting that. And then comparing to last year, what did nonprofits say as it relates to planned giving? 85% saying they're hearing just as much, if not more, about planned giving compared to a year ago. So at the Fundraising School, we always encourage you to have planned giving be part of your overall fundraising plan. And I know for some of you, you're like, there is not enough Advil in the world for me to get my brain around the complexities of planned giving. We're feeling that, okay? There's no doubt that planned giving is very much being like a specialist in the medical field, right? That those of us as fundraisers, we're those good general practitioners. And those planned giving geeks, those planned giving fundraisers, they just are, they're the specialists, okay? What I want to say to you is this. Most planned gifts are wills, retirement plans, and insurance policies. Named as a beneficiary in the will, if there's anything left over in the retirement plan after I pass away, if there's anything left over in the insurance policy after I pass away, I'm going to name the nonprofit as a beneficiary. You could have donors do that before close of business today. That's how simple that is. Where we get hung up on are those complexities, the charitable remainder trust, the charitable annuity, where the donor is actually getting paid while she's still alive in this planned gift, or other people the donor knows are drawing an income from this planned gift. A lot of us just go, the nuclear cloud emoji, right, that we have on our phones. You are always in the relationship business. That's your responsibility. If you encounter a donor who starts talking about these more complex gifts, there are places you can go to find the technical expertise. Maybe you have that on your board, through some lawyers on your board or accountants on your board, financial planners on your board. You can also go if you're served by a community foundation. In Indiana, we're very fortunate. We have 92 counties. Every county has a community foundation. I'm not sure what the setup there is in Maryland, but I would bet if you don't have one in your county, you probably have one very nearby or serving your region. These folks have expertise on this. And you say, well, wait a minute, I have to pay the community foundation. Yeah, maybe 2 to 3%. which means what? You get 97 and 98%, and you brought in the expert to help make sure you did it correctly, right? And the workers deserve their wages, and so they're paid. Or if you pay the law firm, they get paid, and you still get the gift. So don't get hung up on the really complicated part of planned giving. These data are telling us that because of the pandemic, it's an even better time to be talking with our donors. And remember, who's your best planned giving donor? A longtime donor to your nonprofit organization, right? And there are ways to have this conversation like, you're going to die soon? No, that's what we're afraid of, that the conversation going there, right? You start talking, first of all, we're listening to the donor as always and seeing they're talking about, oh, because of COVID, we're updating our estate plan. Did you include charitable giving in that? So there's an opening, those types of conversations. Or if you want to bring it up, you say, we notice you've been donating to our nonprofit for 10 years. What is your favorite gift during that time and why? How would you like to see that happen again 20, 30 years from now? If they're 60, 70 years old, they know very likely, now as we say in the Polish, 100 lat, may you live 100 years, but they kind of know where you're getting at there without explicitly saying the word death. Or you say, you've been with us for 10 years. How have you seen our organization grow over that time that has led to your consistent giving? How would you like to see that be happening 20, 30 years from now? So there's some gentle ways, right? Good friend Russell James, who's writing the chapter on planned giving in our next edition of our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, he really encourages us to the verbs we use. Instead of saying, would you like to leave a legacy? He says, you ask, how would you like to continue your impact? Because if somebody struggles with their own mortality, you're leaving, as opposed to, how would you like to continue your impact? And these data show now more than ever. And again, listen to that podcast this week with Michael Kenyon. He leads the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. Get you some more information on that as well. All right, let's move on. That's individual. So we've looked at the context of philanthropy and fundraising, looked at what's happening in the sector. We've looked at individual donors and what's happening now from foundations. We know that many foundations set up COVID relief funds. And we also know that more foundations provided greater flexibility in the grants that they were providing. We also know that the community philanthropy organizations, primarily the United Ways and community foundations, they responded with local funds, nearly 1,000 funds, raising nearly $1 billion. About 60% of that went out almost immediately. And if you're receiving those funds, one thing we can do is to help our community philanthropy organizations with their reporting back to their donors. So transparency, prompt reports, full information, what worked, what didn't, because this happened very fast relative to how foundations normally work. And we can help them with stewardship by providing them with that timely information. By the way, one little inside finding that came out was this one right here, where when the researchers then looked at the community philanthropy based on demographic information, that communities that were more Caucasian and more middle and upper income were more likely to have these COVID relief funds through their United Ways community foundations. Those that were less white and more lower income were less likely to have these funds, and the researchers can only speculate. And one reason might be that communities that are less Caucasian and more lower income, both together, might have more informal methods of helping each other, neighbor to neighbor, right? Informal associations, maybe through their faith-based organizations, which are not required to report in the same way as other nonprofits. Or sadly, this is another racial and economic disparity caused by COVID. So it's out there, something we need to be aware of as we think about leading within the philanthropic sector. All right, what about our friends in the business sector? What's up with them? Well, interestingly, about 3/4 of them said that they were increasing their giving to nonprofits during the year 2020. Okay, obviously the immediate need is where they tended to be giving to more often than not. And much like the private foundations, they were creating more flexibility for their recipients of their sponsorships and other charitable gifts. Here are a couple takeaways now from the business sector. Number one, we know that businesses budget everything, down to the last paperclip, including their charitable giving. So the charitable giving that happened in 2020, those budgets were actually created in 2019, right? So the charitable giving for 2021 Those budgets were crafted in 2020 when all the economic calamity started and continued and persisted, right? So that's something to keep in mind with our business friends. We also know that businesses during the pandemic have been, we've seen and heard anecdotally, more in-kind gifts, more, hey, I've got staff who can help you with their technical expertise, sharing of staff in that way and expertise. So again, we need to be thinking about what's going to happen with business sector giving in 2021. We don't know for sure. Unlike being tracked by, say, the stock market, unsurprisingly, corporate giving is tied directly to GDP, gross domestic product reports, and of course, the company's individual profit margin. In a capitalistic society, businesses are created to make money, not give it away. When they give it away, they do so to help them make money. By the way, if you have a problem with that, get that, feel that a little bit myself, have to be honest with you, then just don't fundraise from the business sector, right? Just know when we fundraise from the business sector, that's kind of their mindset, and we need to meet them there if we're willing to meet. And there may be some businesses that you're more willing to do that with, or industries or business people than others. That's where your gift acceptance policy comes in. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens with business giving in 2021, knowing that the budgets were made last year, and yet there's some forecasting that the economy is going to warm up this year. So just be mindful of that as you're intersecting with your friends from the business sector.
And then, Bill, Connor Wolf, who is on our board, wanted to share that he's part of Maryland nonprofits, and they did a study that showed that nonprofits led by people of color are less likely to be approved for COVID-related fund aid, such as the PPP funds. So that might be one of the differences. And then Valerie wanted to share that she worked for a food bank, and at the end of the year, she had significant donations from companies with who had funds that they normally use for holiday parties, and they redirected that money to the food bank. So she's curious on how kind of that attitude is going to carry over to 2021.
Be very interesting to see, Valerie. That's a great point, as we're seeing companies trying to just do something to stay engaged. And to Connor's point, then we have to ask the tough questions about why. I mean, obviously it's discrimination. That's disgusting, deplorable, and it needs to end. Is there a lack of information? Is there an information gap? All these different things we need to be thinking about, and be very intentional about closing that gap in many ways, either in our own local communities or as we communicate to the people in charge of running those programs. So Connor, thanks for keeping that out in the forefront. All right, so we've looked at individuals, foundations, business sector. Now let's try to look ahead. All right, we have about a half an hour left here together. First of all, there's this mixed picture on the economy. You remember last March, people were talking about, like, get ready for a recession that lasts 10 years. Like, this thing is just going to shut us down to zero for many, many years. And fortunately, that did not happen. And again, not to minimize people who are struggling economically now, but the worst case scenario did not happen. And again, back in June, the GDP loss was predicted to be 6.5. It wound up being 2.4, still negative, but not as bad, right? Unemployment by the end of the year was still expected to be up around 9-10%. It was down under 7, still way too high, but not as bad as people thought it was going to be. Same thing with unemployment. By the end of 2021 is now predicted to be at 5%, which a lot of economists tell you 5% is actually kind of a sweet spot. That's generally considered full employment, because some people are leaving jobs, or the trailing spouse, the trailing partner, these kinds of things that are happening, and that's the prediction right now for the end of 2021. And why? Again, you can't just point to one reason. Human behavior is very complex. The forces on this economy were external, right? We didn't have too much debt or a housing bubble or a tech bubble, right? There's a coronavirus coming from the outside. So once coronavirus goes away, the question is, how soon will the economy come back? Large federal stimulus. We've had 2, President Biden planning number 3. And now, after last Saturday's vote in the Senate, they're saying now everybody's going to be turning their attention to this next federal stimulus package. So we'll keep an eye on that. Learning the lesson from the Great Recession, either government response or people who are saving money. The savings rate in the United States right now up to 14% of income. I tweeted about this on Friday or Saturday with a clip from my colleague Una Osili. Savings are a form of wealth. And so what's going to happen to that person who saved all that money after learning the lesson from the Great Recession? I'm going to save more, but now the economy's better and I still have that money sitting in my savings account. Maybe that money goes to retirement. Maybe that money goes to spending. Maybe some of that money goes to charitable giving. Something to keep in mind as you think about working with your donors. Some sectors, again, are still doing strong, and other sectors have appeared to just completely recover, right? Automobiles. Have you shopped for an automobile lately and seen the prices? What do the increased prices tell you? Huge demand for cars, used cars, prices way high, huge demand right now. Keep that in mind. Realtors, you have realtors in your donor database. Housing up last year, nearly 6%, the best housing sales in 15 years, right? So again, there are some areas doing well, despite, again, the severe economic dislocation that is still a reality, because not all the news is good, right? Especially as we came into the new year when the holiday season ended and that first unemployment number in January really hit everybody's attention. Now we know that number has continued to shrink as the weeks have gone along, but are still much higher than where we were a year ago, right? The unemployment number in December, where we had the job loss significantly, the first decline in 7 months. And we also know that household spending and household income were down towards the end of last year. And this quote from the business press that the economic recovery was sputtering. So certainly some good news, but nowhere near great news and still a lot of people suffering. So as we move forward now to think about the future, we can look at these economic indicators, right? But when we think about charitable giving, remember the personal values of the donor, the personal motivations of the donor, that explains why people give. How much and when is determined by the economic factors, right? My personal income, my personal wealth, businesses, the GDP, foundations, the stock market, right? These external things determine the how and the when. The why are my personal values and my personal motivations, which is why your fundraising in 2021, the first 1,000 predictors are your current donors and your relationship with your current donors and your stewardship and your cultivation, your engagement, finding creative ways in COVID season to stay in touch with your donors. You know, a lot of this has been virtual. I can tell you in the summer, there were some, summer up here in the northern part of the country, our northern half, right? When we had decent weather, nonprofits saying like they were being invited to bring the lawn chair and sit 6 feet away on the driveway from the donor. Or, the donor is up on the porch and the fundraisers on the lawn chair sitting on the lawn, keeping healthy distance. So we heard some of that, right? We just have to find these creative ways. So your relationship with your donors is going to be your best predictor for 2021. Now, what about these economic indicators? I love this bar chart. Joanna, you heard me say this before. Now, my wife's home today because it's a federal holiday for her. So I'm going to keep this on the down low, but our wedding anniversary is coming up. And this is going to be my gift to her. I'm going to expand this, put a frame on it, hang it in the family room, put the black shroud over it, and then unveil it. She's going to let me stay another week. I mean, this thing's a work of art. This thing is so beautiful. And I know you're chuckling right now. When I'm done explaining, you're going to make about 10 of them and give them out to your special people too. And here's why. There is so much in this bar graph that can help us think about 2021. All right. So let's unpack that. So here's 2021. And this is, by the way, where I'm coming back to that first slide on 2019 giving. This is going to put a bookend on it now. So here we are in 2019. The line graph is current dollars, what the dollars were worth in the year they were donated. Okay. The bars are adjusted to put everything in the value of 2019, so-called constant dollars. Because of inflation, money has a different value from one year to the next. Good news number one, whether we use the current dollars or we use the constant dollars, if we drew a regression line, the slope was upward. That's a good, easy, simple takeaway. Number two, the gold bars are recession years. The gray silver bars are healthy economy years. Takeaway number two, the gold bars even exist. It's not like charitable giving goes to zero when there's a recession. Look, here's the Great Recession. It's not down to zero. It's not like the 6-year-old missing her front teeth, that there's a big gap. We still see gold bars, okay? Number three, the declines typically are not all that significant, right? Now, every recession's different, but you look here, 79.80, a little bit of a drop off. And then even during the recession, charitable giving was going up in inflation adjusted terms. Here, 89 to 90, down a little bit and a leveling off. Here, what's this, 99 into 2000, down a little bit, right? And then, of course, the Great Recession, no doubt, we saw a significant decline in charitable giving for a few years. But generally speaking, the average decline in charitable giving when adjusted for inflation because of a recession is 0.5%. That's it. Basically, charitable giving breaks even from one year to the next during a recession, okay? Here's another takeaway. What happens when the recession's over? Charitable giving tends to go up. Charitable giving tends to go up. Now, in this case, I told you every recession is different, did go down a little bit, even as our economy came back, but then went up more dramatically. And yes, we had the huge plunge with the Great Recession, but also then the significant increase. Definitely a check mark or V-shaped recovery here. So when a recession ends, there's no doubt there's a pent-up demand for spending. I'm going to go buy stuff. I'm going to go travel, right? There's also a pent-up demand for more charitable giving. So keep that in mind as you're planning 2021. And then the last takeaway. I know I already have you. I know you've already called the printer. You're getting 10 of these made. But wait, there's one more thing, okay? We had the 6 best years of charitable giving ever before the pandemic hit. So take yourself to that Atlantic shoreline, residents of Maryland. And you know, the tide comes up onto the beach, goes back into the ocean, comes up on the beach, goes back on the ocean, right? Charitable giving for 6 years, that tide came out of the ocean, kept going. Better grab the chairs, kept going. Oh, grab the small children, kept going. Oh, it's reaching the parking lot, right? Had not receded. So remember those economic data about the shocks coming from outside of the economy. And the moment that shock, COVID, goes away, how fast is the economy going to come back? How fast is charitable giving going to come back? If it even suffered a huge downward slope to begin with. And a guy like Rick Dunham is saying, and I can tell you anecdotally, won't be surprised if we at least break even on inflation adjusted terms or come pretty darn close. That's why this is a great bar chart. And again, it's not to say an individual nonprofit isn't going to suffer or a particular subsector. We think, I'm looking at you, arts, I'm looking at you, environment and animal welfare, that is going to struggle more than others. Totally get that. These are aggregate macro numbers. But you see what happens here when a recession ends, what tends to happen with charitable giving. And we know each individual is different. We've already talked about our single woman households, right? So at first, again, everybody's predicting the economy smearing into the ground. Fortunately, that didn't happen. We hoped for a V-shaped recovery. You know, the last Great Recession, the last pandemic, that's what happened. You've heard the phrase the roaring 20s, the 1920s. What happened the last 2 years before the 1920s? The last pandemic, 1918 and 1919. I'd take another roaring 20s, 2020s, right? Wouldn't that be great? We had that kind of recovery. This square root recovery where we had, get my pointer here, had the downward, had the upward, and now we're just kind of leveling off a little bit, much more slower progress, right? Then New Year hit, we started getting some of these January and February economic data. People are talking this W, down, up, oop, down, hopefully up again soon, right? So all these different kinds of letters and shapes we can think about as we look ahead into 2021. All of it with the individual mind being this K-shaped recovery where all of us suffered the immediate plunge. But now, based on sector, based on job, based on education level, some people are on that upward slope. Same factors, some people are on that downward slope, and it's your job as fundraisers to know who is where on that letter K in your donor database. These folks still doing well, these folks not so much. You know, we see the unemployment data that came out a week ago Friday, right? Moving in the right direction, but not different for these two different groups, right? So just keep that in mind as you think about donors, as you think about your current donors, as you think about bringing in new donors, that again, the economy is not affecting every sector the same way, every nonprofit the same way, certainly not every individual donor the same way. All right, here's another great chart. And this especially ties in to our fundraising from individuals, but also foundations, okay? What this line graph is showing you is that when the S&P 500 stock market goes up, from January to December, the next calendar year, charitable giving tends to go up. Not by the same percentage, but the same trend direction. Sadly, conversely, the opposite is also true. When the market goes down, charitable giving goes down the next year. Why? Because a lot of donors have their wealth in the stock market, and they might be giving stock gifts, appreciated gifts, things of that nature. There's also this belief that there's this intangible feeling of greater wealth because I keep hearing that the stock market is up. Also, we know where do foundations have their money? In the stock market. So when the stock market goes up, the foundations who have that 5% payout requirement, I didn't take a lot of math at Northwestern, but 5% of a bigger number is a bigger number, right? So this year in 2021, whether they work on the 1-year average or the 3 or 4 year rolling average, that average is going to be higher that they're going to be staking the payout rate in 2021, let alone so many foundations saying that we're going above and beyond the 5%. And the latest survey that I saw in the Chronicle was that foundations are planning on staying there at least for a while. So that's why, and why the S&P 500, by the way, not the Dow. Well, the Dow's only 30 stocks. Why not the Russell? Why not the Wilshire? All these others. The S&P tend to be larger corporations that don't go up significantly in the market, but they don't decline significantly in the market. It's a little more steady as the market goes with the S&P 500. And you look, that correlation that I explained to you has been true over the last 50, 60 years, except for like 5 or 6 years. This is one of the strongest correlations our research team tells me, one of the strongest correlations we have in our portfolio of research findings, that's how trustworthy this is. So December 31st, you're celebrating New Year's Eve. New Year's Day comes along, much like me. You're ready for Northwestern's bowl game or whatever football team you were following that was playing that day, or however you were getting together for New Year's Day. But you took a look at the stock market, didn't you? And you saw that last year it went up 16%. Now, some people go like, come on, 10 million people still unemployed, W-shaped recovery. This is not the economy. And it's not the economy. When people say stock market's not the economy, absolutely correct. But remember, the stock market is always betting the future, okay? They want to be 4, 5, 6 months ahead so that they're in now before the price goes up and they get their gain, or they want to get out now before the price plummets, right? So they're always betting the future, and they're not always right. They have no magic powers, no secret seance services here, but this is what they're doing. So the stock marketing is telling us 2021 overall is going to see economic gain, and then also ties into charitable giving prospects. So again, keep that in mind when you're talking to your individuals. Now, again, is a great time to be talking to people about their stock gifts. They have that long appreciated stock gift or stock that they're holding. And if they sell it, they need to pay capital gains tax, right? Unless they donate that stock to you. If they're eligible to itemize, they can itemize the value of that stock and they don't have to pay the cap gains on it. Double tax win. So if you have folks who have stock and you think they could donate out of that, it's a good time to be talking to your individuals along those lines. There are 2 economists on our faculty who share these data with us. All right, so that's the economy. Just some things to keep in mind. And again, those of you in that Silver Spring, College Park, DC-ish area, you get the Washington Post delivered every day. You pay close attention to this, maybe more than the rest of us. Keep in mind what's happening now. We have a new presidential administration, a reshuffling of the deck chairs in Congress, and what's going to happen. Well, the latest proposal is stimulus checks went out December, early January. Could have more stimulus checks again. Now, who gets them at what levels? Apparently, that's still all being negotiated. But I'm sure if we had time in this meeting, some of you would report receiving kind of unsolicited gifts. And it's people get that stimulus check and say, I'm still employed, doing fine. I'm just going to pass that along to my favorite charity. So we need to keep an eye on that news. Remember, the universal charitable deduction is still in place for 2021, up to $300 for non-itemizers. Now, that's for the taxes that get filled out in 2022. But that's something to be talking to your donors about, is there's still that UCD for 2021. There's also the ability to donate for people who do itemize. They can usually only donate up to 60% of their adjusted gross income. Now they can donate 100% of their adjusted gross income. This year only, right? Happened last year. It's also in place for this year, but only this year. One takeaway there is if you have somebody who's thinking about making multi-year gifts, they might want to accelerate those gifts into this year to take full advantage of that AGI ceiling being lifted for this year only. So be mindful of that and be watching to see if that policy stays in place for future years. There's conversations about changing how capital gains are taxed, right? That either the rate itself will go up or maybe we'll tax capital gains at somebody's personal income tax rate, which is usually higher than the capital gains tax rate. Our research shows that when capital tax rates go up, capital gains tax rates go up, charitable giving goes up. Because instead of paying the higher capital gains tax, somebody would rather donate that stock, donate that land, or so forth. So that's why we keep an eye on that. The business tax rate, I think I mentioned this earlier, really not as much of an impact on business giving, right? The businesses tend to be more their own profits, and then kind of the GDP, the health of the economy overall. And again, each individual donor is different. Each business is different. These are some of those macro findings that we know, and then how we need to be paying attention. And you advocate however you want, like as I mentioned, to your member of Congress, your US Senator, as you communicate with the White House, however you're engaged civically, just some things to keep an eye on as we move forward. All right, last topic here is digital fundraising. As we're having a digital training, right, on fundraising. I chose these photos purposely. Your neighbor to the south, a little bit, after Virginia, North Carolina, that's that photo of the Wright brothers, the first human motorized space flight, right around 1900. However long you thought the Earth existed, thousands, millions, billions of years, let's use millions, right? It took millions of years to get to the Wright brothers, human-powered flight. Then, less than 60 years after that, the Soviet Union put a person into space. A few years later, Alan Shepard, pictured here, went into space for the United States. And soon after that, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. And in that same decade, less than 10 years later, Neil's standing on the moon. Okay. About 30 years later, we now have human beings living in outer space full time. So for sake of discussion, millions of years to get to the Wright brothers, only 100 years to get to living up there. Keep that in mind when you think about what's happened with digital fundraising in 2020. Technology never goes backwards, okay? And once a technology disruption happens, the acceleration, the future developments happen even faster. And that's the mindset we need to have as fundraisers now in terms of what in the world is going to be true about digital fundraising, even when the pandemic is over. So a survey from our good friends at BWF found that both donor participation and dollars are still driven by those in-person meetings, but look how social media and electronic methods are the next 2 or 3 on each list, right? So digital is here to stay, and it's only accelerating is the point of these data here. So the advice is you need multi-channel, you need in-person. We can still mail some letters, we can still do some advertising, but where are you with social media? And it's not just enough to have a Facebook site, Twitter, Insta, whatever the case might be. It's how you're utilizing those sites in a highly interactive, highly engaging way, all right? For example, analyze who's on your sites. Who's liking more often than not, sharing more often than not, commenting more often than not? Are they a donor? That might be a form of repeat engagement that it's time to ask that donor for a higher gift. Are they not a donor? It's time to introduce yourself to find out why they're so engaged on your social media site, and it's time to ask that new person for a gift, right? So it's how we're now using the sites, not just having them, right? Major gift opportunities, finding those annual fund people or highly engaged on your social media. And video is the name of the game. I hope some of you are doing this already, where you just do a quick video thank you. And you can use ThankView. There's different softwares you can use. I use my phone, use a YouTube channel, post a quick little video on the YouTube channel, unlisted, so only the recipient can see it, email them the video. Highly personalized. Joanna, I just want to thank you for your gift to the Dottie Rosso Scholarship Fund. We know as a veteran fundraiser, you know more than others on how important that fund is to train, especially small nonprofits in fundraising skills. I hope everything's well with your nonprofit. And by the way, thank you for your leadership of Maryland Apra. that whole association benefits from your leadership. But again, I just wanted to take this moment, Joanna, and thank you for your gift. And I look forward for our next opportunity to see each other be well. Said her name at the beginning, said her name at the end, tailored to who she is. I just made that up, Joanna, by the way. I was riffing there. I hope some of that was correct. And it doesn't have to be fancy produced in a studio. You watch The Office, you watch Parks and Rec, right? You hold your phone, informal, it works, right? Those types of videos, personalized, quick for cultivation and stewardship. And then lastly, we're seeing nonprofits are hiring for this, either full-time digital fundraising, if they have that capacity, or all of us needing to be trained. And if you go back on our podcasts, about 2-3 weeks ago, we had 2 in a row from Justin Ware. He unpacks this in greater detail. And this summer, we are launching a new certificate in digital fundraising. It's going to be 3 3-hour classes, or yeah, 3 3-hour classes taught in a virtual format, 2 to 5 Eastern, 3 days in a row. That's one class. Do that 3 times, you're in the certificate, informed by Justin and other experts. Need our boards engaged more than ever before, right? Put those expectations out there for your boards to fundraise. The research shows the odds of your board engaging in fundraising are 11 times greater when you communicate those expectations. And then as we look ahead, here's where we probably are still now, right? Huge storm off the ocean. Those of you in the eastern part of Maryland. Hopefully by July to September, the people who want to be vaccinated, we're being told, can be vaccinated by summer, early fall. Still gonna be kind of soggy with the storms over, you know, still letting the kind of the water clear off the pier there, and the clouds are starting to dissipate. That hopefully by the end of the year, we'll see that sunshine. The takeaway here is I can't guarantee exact months, but probably more than ever before, we can't plan for one fundraising year in 2021. We might have 2 years, we might have 3 years, not 12 months in a year, but time segments, 2 time segments, 3 time segments. And as fundraising leaders, we just need to adapt to that. And we need to prepare for that. Meaning, if I normally have an in-person fundraising event in November, I might be thinking I'm still going to have it in person in November, right? In the summer, not so much, right? I just had a meeting with Liz Jackson, our very talented associate director, before this, and we have a summer event. We were deciding, should we have it in person? Should we not? Are people going to come? Are they not? These are the kind of conversations we all need to be having as we think about what 2021 is probably going to be very different from one season to the next. And the big takeaway there is, are we viewing COVID as an event or as an era? Because if we plan for this as an event, we'll just go back to what we were doing before, right? But if COVID turns out to be an era and we plan for an event, we won't be ready for the next opportunities and the next possibilities. So I think as fundraisers, we have a leg up on other professions because we always have a growth mindset as fundraisers. We always have a sense of abundance. We always have a sense of possibility. And by viewing COVID as an era, we can be more adaptable to what is happening now and what could be happening in the future. And remember, with the future, during times of crisis, the key is scenario planning. Don't just plan for one scenario and I'm putting all my eggs in that basket. Think about multiple scenarios and plan for each one of those, right? And maybe that looks something like this for you. And each scenario has its own contingencies. And then don't make definitive decisions, make so-called provisional decisions, meaning that you can always reel a decision back if there's a change in information, new information. Oops, the scenario didn't work out the way we did. You still have time to recover and go down that other pathway. So scenario planning is always important, and more so than ever in our fundraising for this year. So let me stop there. Joanna, I know we have about 5 minutes left or so for any final questions, comments, disagreements, people doing things a different way as we have this art of fundraising, and I'd like to turn that over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill. The wealth of information in here can guide us in so many ways. And I wanted to talk about that in a minute. But first, I did want to just do some housekeeping business. We really appreciate everyone being with us today. And as a way to say thank you for those who are not members, we wanted to offer a 20% discount for membership to Apra Maryland through this week. And we're going to put the code up, which is IU Philanthropy. You can go on our website to be part of Apra Maryland. With Apra Maryland, we are having an event on March 16th. We're having a Taco Tuesday networking event just to have some fun together. And you know, Bill's bleak website picture of January to was that June? You know, maybe we can use a little bit of tacos together and just have some fun. And I wanted to thank our sponsors, Donor Search and iWave, for giving us this platform. So back to you, Bill. I just really love all this information, and really APRA really deals with strategic information and trying to use data to be able to make fundraising more efficient. And I feel like your information can help us all be better at our jobs as we're thinking about if we're researching, who should we be targeting right now? If we are prospect managers, who should we be saying, have this as your leads or have these people in your portfolios? And then even for those in analytics on how do we incorporate this data to have dynamic data, because a lot of the modeling that we had was based off of 3-5 years ago, and the world is changing really fast right now. And so I think this information, if we can take it and incorporate it into our work, will really help us be stronger partners when we are meeting with fundraisers. So I definitely appreciate that. Do you have any specific recommendations for people who are in the research world when we're talking to gift officers, how to kind of frame this idea of 3 years within 1 year, or kind of switching priorities quickly?
First of all, if I'm ever playing Clue, the board game Clue, I want one of you on my team. I think probably APRA members, like, you already know it's the certain somebody with the candlestick in the kitchen, right? Because that's what you guys do. Or like there's those CSI television shows, like we should have one like APRA Baltimore, right? And it's the prospect researchers. Anyway, I would say probably the biggest thing, if I think about prospect research, as things start to turn in those seasons, is we're going to reach a point when it's time again to find new donors. The research shows that during an economic downturn, donors tend to stick with the nonprofits that they've been with all along. As all of you know, fundraising happens at the speed of trust. Donors want to see stability, so they often just stay with the nonprofits they know best. Now, some of you have had some success with new donor acquisition. Good for you. That's the hardest donor during an economic downturn. I would be preparing now for what processes do I need to be putting in place for new donor acquisition. Once that storm ends, it gets cloudy and the sun starts coming up again.
That's great. Well, thank you again. And Bill, thank you. Liz, thank you. Connor, thank you for helping us on the technical side as well. And thank you everyone for spending this afternoon with us. We do have this recorded and it will be available. Bill, are we able to send out the slides as well?
Absolutely, and use those with your colleagues, your staff, your board. We're glad to have our leverage, our learnings leverage like that. And go make the world a better place. Let us know how we can help. Bill Stan at iu.edu is my email address, and @_Bill Stan, my Twitter handle. And if we can help, let us know.
That's great. And if you wanted to send us any links that you talked about today, we can also send this as a follow-up, especially some of the classes that you talked about that you're going to be putting out as well. So thank you, and have a wonderful week, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Bill.